So hello everybody, welcome to our virtual 67 Pall Mall. Later today I'll be speaking with Frederic Drouin at Domaine Drouin in Burgundy, and then with Garen, Sherry and Shannon Staglin at their Napa Valley estate, Staglin Family Wines. For now, I'm very pleased to welcome back Lorch, who will be speaking with Francois Duviver and Guillaume d'Angeville from Domaine de Pelican in the Jura. So please do chat away on the side, share with us what you're drinking, where you're drinking it from. We'd love to see what you do with your empty bottles. So unless they're going straight to the recycling, please take a photo, put it on social media under hashtag 67 from home. And the most creative one will send you a magnum of something nice. So as usual, we'll have 15 minutes at the end to ask questions. So hello Wink, hello Francois, and hello Guillaume.
Hi everybody.
Hi Wink.
Hi Ronan. This has been a bit of a panicky one, and I'd like to welcome Guillaume and Francois here. This is the first time I've done an interview on 67, and so really looking forward to doing this. And yeah, welcome to you both who are together in Burgundy somewhere in the Côte d'Or, whereas I'm in Haute-Savoie. But I've put a background picture of one of the Domaine du Pélican vineyards, the Grand Courelet. So just to make us feel at home in the Jura. I'm going to share my screen and just do a little bit of an introduction to everyone on biodynamics in the Jura, and also on the background to Domaine du Pélican for people who don't know it. So give me a moment to get that one sorted out. And there we go from beginning. Et voila. So the idea today is that I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of biodynamics in the Jura, and then how the Domaine du Pélican fits in. So most of you will know about the Jura, or will have attended one of my webinars before where I talk about the basics on the Jura. And it seems to be the most unlikely place to actually have a lot of biodynamic domains, because there's a lot of rain there. The soils are very heavy with lots of marly clay. And the big challenge is, of course, to control the weeds and to control the disease. And that is difficult at the best times. But biodynamics goes back to really the early 2000s, the beginning of the century. And one of the pioneers, one of the great pioneers who still does it is Antoine Pignet from Domaine Pignet. And today, you see very many familiar names here. I did a little bit of a round up on who was actually certified biodynamic. And the numbers are pretty impressive. And you have to add to this some other domains who are organic and who still use quite a lot of biodynamic methods, some of whom I know Francois works very closely with in the vicinity of Arbois, and he'll be talking about them and how they work together, especially at the beginning of the domain, in a minute. So today, Stéphane Tissot, many of you will know, one of the very earliest in biodynamic after Domaine Pignet, who were in Côte de Jura. And both of them have pretty large domains, 50 hectares for Stéphane, 15 for Pignet. And then Domaine de la Pinte came along. These are roughly in order of becoming certified biodynamic, but it's a little bit rough. So Domaine de la Pinte came along, and they have over 30 hectares. And then the other ones are all much smaller, but there'll be familiar names there with Octavin. And in 2012, Domaine du Pélican came along, but initially with just 5 hectares, and now with 15 hectares, all run biodynamically. So these are the ones around Arbois, and then further south you've got Pignet, Bourdi, Chandivin, Ganva, who is pretty famous for his methods of biodynamics. So I did a little total, and I found that there was 175 hectares, roughly, if you add all these holdings together, which is 8% of the total Jura, which is a pretty dramatically high amount. The organic total is about 20%. In fact, I'm going to ask you, Francois or Guillaume, do you know what the percent is in Burgundy to give us a comparison? Have you any ideas?
We were just talking about this while you were talking, and we think the order of magnitude for organic is about 15%, 1.5. And for biodynamics, it's much, much, much lower. It's probably half of what you found in Jura.
Yeah. So that's amazing, and that just shows you what an incredible job that Jura is doing. And this is what I want to explore a little bit with Francois and Guillaume, to see how this can be done in these difficult terroir situations. So before we get on to that, a little bit of an intro for those who do not know the story behind Domaine du Pélican, which was founded by Guillaume, the Marquis d'Angeville of Volnay, together with François Duviver, who has been working with Guillaume for many years on the Volnay estate, the Marquis d'Angeville, famous for being in Volnay for many generations. And so the inspiration for this, the story has been written about everywhere, but in case there's a couple in the audience who don't know about it, Guillaume was dining out in Paris at the Taillevent, restaurant Taillevent, and was given a blind white wine by the sommelier, which is what always happened there and maybe still does happen there. And this was way back in, I think, 2008, 2009, something like that. And Guillaume was a little bit annoyed because he thought it was from the Côte d'Or, and the rule was that the sommelier should not give him anything from Burgundy. And the sommelier assured him it was not from the Côte d'Or, it was from elsewhere. And it turned out to be a Chardonnay from Stéphane Tissot from the great vintage of 2005. And at that point, inspiration led Guillaume to start exploring the Jura together with Francois and looking for possibilities to establish a domain there. So that's keeping a long story short, I hope. And with the help of the local geology expert, they looked for several years and eventually, at roughly the same time, found that the Château de Chavannes, with 5 hectares in Montigny-les-Arcieux, was available for sale, and the vineyards were already being run biodynamically. And then there was another 5 hectares that were up for grabs from Jean-Marc Brignot, a famous natural wine producer. If you're not familiar with who he is, he's written about in my book, but he hasn't been making wine in the Jura for some years. Unfortunately, the vineyards were in not great shape. So in fact, they have been all replanted. And then their first vintage was in 2012. And in 2014, they got the opportunity to take over most of the vineyards from Jacques Pouffnet, also in Montigny-les-Arcieux, and he was retiring. And so that's why they took those open and have taken over a few more recently. So now there's nearly 15 hectares, not all in production, biodynamically farmed, and all of it is within 5 kilometers of the winery. Originally, they took over Château de Chavannes winery, and that's where they still are, but a new one is on the way. So there's the introduction. So I want to begin by sort of asking some questions, perhaps with Francois. How hard was it to start in in the area?
As always, when you start, you don't imagine all the problems that you can have. So you start with all your energy and everything is okay, but you understand very quickly that the climate is very hard. We have 2 times the water, for example, as we have in Burgundy. The soils, due to the marls, are more heavy. so retains the water more. So when you can pass for plowing is really more harder than in Burgundy. When you have understand that, we have to discover new method of plowing, which is different of Burgundy. I don't have the word, but like we say bêchage in French, you do something like that in the soil.
Yeah, I never know the word for bêchage either. But it is the way that you plow, and you effectively a method
Yes.
of weeding
Yes.
that was different because of the heavy clays.
Yes, in fact, the system is that you have to take quite big blocks of clay, you put it on the top of the soil, and with the alternance of sun and humidity, it's destroying itself. And each year, each half year, you have to do it again perpetually.
So do you actually have to use different machines?
Yes.
You do.
Yes.
So that was a surprise at the beginning.
A little bit, yes. I don't think that it was so hard to plow in Jura.
And I think that you have a couple of Jura producers were quite instrumental in helping you in the beginning. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Yes. I have two very nice friends for a long time in Pupillin, who helps me at the beginning. I can give the name. It's Julien Maréchal and Jean-Michel Petit. But I can say that the other producers are here and help together. And Pélican too, for example, with our neighbor in Montigny. We share some materials, we have lots of discussion together. Yes, I think due to the complication of the making of plowing or treatments of the wines, people are helping themselves more. If you stay alone, I think you will die quickly.
So perhaps that's something that biodynamics just brings. It brings a sort of collective way of working that everybody wants to share experiences.
Yes, at the beginning we have only 5 hectares in production. So we start with the material of Volnay, the dynamiseur of Volnay. So I take the equipment, yeah. So I took the equipment of Volnay. And for the dynamisation, I sleep in Pupillin, and they helped me to make that. And they asked me to take more water and the bigger equipment I had to start with me the biodynamic.
Okay, so I think just to explain to everybody about this map, which is depending on the size of your screens, you may not be able to read it all, but Montigny-les-Arcieux is a village outside of Arbois, just a couple of kilometers away, but within the Arbois appellation. And this is where Clos Saint-Laurent is, which was the first domain. But also En Barbie was taken over, which is up here in the same village at the same time, because Chavannes had that planted with Chardonnay. And then the other big site that was taken over at the beginning was Grand Courrelet, which was before being farmed by Brignot, and before that by a famous Arbois vigneron who had retired a long time ago. So I've lost this is Grand Courrelet. And I think you started with hoping you were going to save some of the Savagnin there, is that right? Francois, yes, the Savagnin that was growing in Grand Courrelet, the old vines you were hoping to keep?
Yes, we were hoping to keep more than we have kept. We have kept less than half an hectare of old Savagnin, and we have replanted all the rest of the slope of Grand Curoulet, which is only on grey marls and multicolored marls with Savagnin. We use Savagnin from other friends, from Antoine Pignet that you spoke about at the beginning, and from Domaine de la Part.
Selection massale, a mass selection?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, from Antoine Pignet, who
yes,
I mentioned earlier.
So, yes. I met Antoine Pignet 15 years ago, when we didn't think to Jura yet. With meeting here in Volnay with Pierre Masson of Biodynamics.
Yes, and the Pignet family are a family and a domain that a lot of people, although they export, they're very discreet. They're not as upfront as some of the other domains in the Jura, so they're definitely a very interesting domain to follow, who've been have their 15 hectares in biodynamics and make very, very different styles of wine to the ones from Pélican and to the ones from Stéphane Tissot, and they have their own style of their own, so worth looking at. So then, Guillaume, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the taking on the vineyards of Jacques Pouffenet, who I think has become a good friend now.
Yeah, if I may, I just want to step back one minute about the objective about going into Jura. My initial idea was that I wanted to do something outside of Burgundy, sort of outside my comfort zone, but close enough that it would be real, that we could supervise entirely the estate while still, taking care of Volnay. And when you set that kind of constraints, not very many places are eligible. Yeah, and it's at that moment that the story that you told happened, where I was given this wine blind, and it was just an alignment of planets that led us to Jura when no one else, as you know very well, Wink, no one else from outside of Jura had ever ventured into Jura, and we happened to take that as a sign that, that blind tasting as a sign that this is where we wanted to go. And then with the help of that geologist, it took us like 4 years to get to where we are. And of course, to come back to your question, we never believed in our wildest expectations that we would have a chance one day to take over Jacques Pouffenet's estate, because Jacques' nickname, as you know also, is the Pope of Arbois. He's a wonderful man, on top of being one of the most talented and knowledgeable winemaker. And he lives up the road from Domaine du Pélican in Montigny-les-Arçures. And of course, him being such a well-known, personable winemaker, very quiet but open-minded and hospitable, we paid him a visit very early on, François and I, when we first arrived in Montigny, and we began a relationship. But when the call came in that he wanted to see us to discuss taking over his estate, we fell off our chair, because we never thought we would be chosen by him. And we started a long discussion with him. It took us quite a few months to get through this discussion with him. But we became very closer and closer. And eventually he said, "If you want it, you can have it." And of course we said, yes, we're very honored, and we're delighted that we were going to take over those plots of land. Of course, there was one issue which I'm sure you're aware of, which is that Jacques was not following biodynamic protocol in his estate. And of course, we wanted to convert immediately. He gave us access to the vineyard just after the harvest of 2014. Mm-hmm. and we immediately converted to biodynamic. But you know, it created for us a series of problems that yet again we had not entirely seen in advance. You know, like his interval between rows was slightly narrower than ours, and it's difficult for our tractors to move into his vineyards so easily. So things like that, it took us a little while, and the learning curve was a little steep at the beginning, but it worked out very well, and we are absolutely delighted with the estate that we took over. And of course, you know, the cherry on the cake, which was more than a cherry, was the fact that he entrusted us last year for the with his trousseau Béranger parcel, which we took over and we vinified for the first time in vintage 18.
Yeah, I saw him just after I met with Francois a few weeks ago. I went up to see Jacques Pouffnet for the first time in ages and ages and ages, and I was able to try his 2017, which is of course his last vintage of Béranger, and it's wonderful. So I have a couple of bottles at home now, so I'm looking forward to, I'm going to leave them alone and forget about them for a little while, because I think it's something that we need to talk about when we taste the wines in a minute, is the incredible aging potential of the wines from this area, and you know, I'm sure that includes Domaine du Pélican wines, and you don't have many years yet to go to look back, but I think it's something interesting to talk about. So I think we should move on. I'm going to go rather quickly through the rest, but perhaps, Francois, could you summarize very briefly this main differences between the terroir of the Côte d'Or, shown up here, and the terroir of Jura?
Okay, you see that the Jura and Bourgogne are separated by a valley, which is called the Saône Valley. Mm-hmm. And a long time ago, there was a collapse. All the plains were going down around 1 kilometer down, and it have created two coasts. At the east, it's Jura, and at the west, it's Burgundy. You see with the colors of the lays, it's the same lays because it was the same sea, but the collapse was not exactly the same in Jura and in Burgundy. In Burgundy, you have only the top of the limestone from Bajocien, who have been, some big blocks have been broke and a little bit rolling, but not a lot. It has created the Côte d'Or, the Côte de Beaune, Côte de Nuit. And in Jura, the collapse was more important, so you can discover the layers of gray marls on the top and red and multicolored marls on the bottom. Yeah. And one thing that you have more, behind you have the Alps who are pushing the Jura hills. And you see the blocks in front of the Jura are rolling. So it has created a real big big bazar, je ne sais pas quel est le mot. Some very old lays with the rolling can be up. Yeah. And we have two big types of soil in Jura. You have the soil which are on marls, and the soil who are on the result of the erosion of the limestone of the Bajocien, who are recovering the marls.
Okay.
You can see probably next slide.
There. Is this the one you want to look at?
Perfect. Yes.
To show the different grape varieties and where they actually on the
Yes.
different geology that they work.
Yes, so you have the illustration of what is gray marls. The machine is where we are building our new winery. So you have the gray marls in the bottom, and on the top you have around 3 meters of alteration of the limestone.
Right. So this part here is a limestone, effectively.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 that's
Yeah.
right.
That's the limestone, and this grey. I mean, I've never seen an excavation like this, because normally you see soil pits, and so you look at it down a hole, but you don't see this huge area. So if you didn't sort of quite grasp that, this is where the new winery is being built. And I was able to see it the other day, or it's still not finished, a long way from being finished, but it's a very exciting project. But to have found that layer of grey marl, which is so fabulous for Pulsar and for Savagnin, those two in particular, is quite something. Well, that was a sort of race through. We can come back to this slide if you want when we taste some of the terroir wines. So I'm quite happy to come back to that.
Okay.
But I think we should taste some wine. And we're going to, those people who have the 6 wines, we are starting with a single red. So a question, Francois, when you taste in Burgundy, do you always taste with reds first or with whites first?
With reds, and in Jura too.
Well, in Jura, it's always with reds, but I know that in Burgundy, it varies. It seems to depend on the person.
Okay. No, we always start with red wines for tasting.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think it makes sense. And because we could only have 6 wines today, this was selected in, the selection was made in conjunction with Pelican's UK importer, Justerini and Brooks. And I find it quite frustrating that we only have 1 red here. What made you choose the blend? I mean, this is the one that you've made right from the beginning, from the 2012 vintage. It's always been roughly the same blend. So some of it comes from Le Clos and some from a few other parcels. And it's dominated by Pinot Noir, which I think you've got quite a lot of years of experience in making Pinot Noir. But how was it suddenly making Trousseau and Pulsar as well? How was that experience?
It was a discovering, honestly. The first year in 2012, we make the vinification of Trousseau and Pulsar as the Pinot Noir, but we have a simple way of vinification. The grapes are passing around 2 weeks in vat. We don't play with the temperature. We respect the natural cycle and heating due to the yeast. And we are making 1 pumping over per day. So it's like an infusion. Mm-hmm. So with this way, we were happy. So we have continued to do like that.
Okay.
You know that, Wink, but sometimes in Jura also the vineyards are co-planted. So by definition, it's for us at the beginning, we had no other choice really but to vinify all those red grapes together, because we did not have enough of Trousseau or of Pulsar to make a separate cuvée of. So we made the decision with Francois that we would right away start with a blend, because also that was part of our idea to get out of our comfort zone. This was the first time in our lives, of course, that we had blended, because like you pointed out, we are specialists in Pinot Noir in Burgundy, where everything is 100% Pinot. So the idea of blending was for us quite appealing.
Yes.
And I think the the beauty about this particular cuvée is that it found its audience from the first vintage on, and the audience has remained very loyal to that particular blend because there is the Pinot base that is obviously unmistakable, but Trousseau and Poulsard on top of it bring some vibrancy and some funkiness a little bit to the wine, which make it quite appealing.
Yeah, to me, there maybe especially from the 17 vintage that we have here, there's like an earthiness to it, a rustic character to it. There's the zippy acidity which I love and which is a Jura trademark, really. But I just love the earthiness and almost animal character that the Trousseau brings to the Pinot here.
Exactly.
And I love the concept of red blends in the Jura. I think it's what they would have done years ago, and everybody's moved away from them. But I'm beginning to see a few more, especially among the natural wine producers in the Jura. There are more and more people doing some red blends again, and I think it's a welcome return. And I hope that you keep doing the trois cépages because I think it's great. And this is not your most recent vintage because we decided it would be nice to have at least a couple of wines that were not the 18. I think this is going to age fantastically, this 17. How are you finding the older vintages, 12, 13, 14? How are they aging?
We are drinking some of them. 2012 is still fresh and young. You have a small evolution, but for me, my personal taste, I prefer drinking the reds after 3 or 5 years. I want to have the fruit, the freshness of the youngness of the wine. And
you, Guillaume, are you the same taste?
Yeah, I think this particular trois cépages, I think, is gifted for that. It's gifted for bringing that fruit and together with the earthiness of the Trousseau, which I agree with you, comes out quite early. So I think it makes a perfect wine to be drunk fairly young. I feel differently about Trousseau, our 100% Trousseau cuvée, which started in 18. I think we'll have a chance there to prove that these wines can age. And our Poulsard, same. I think there's some very interesting old Poulsards, so deserving to be aged and to be forgotten in the cellar for a while before being drunk.
Yeah, I've forgotten which year was your first Poulsard?
15.
15. Yeah. So for those of you not familiar with the range from Pélican, there is a Poulsard since 2015, and now just with the last vintage release of 2018, there is the Trousseau Béranger, which is called Béranger as opposed to Jacques Pouffet's Bérangère. And that's about how the lieu-dit or the actual vineyard is named. So, but it's a nice little point of difference to avoid confusion there, I think. And I'm very excited to taste that when I can, when I have the chance. Well, thank you for that. Shall we move on to the whites, because we've got 5 whites. And the first one is a blend from various different parcels. And one of the things impressive with that map, we didn't have a scale on the map, but the map, everything is within 5 kilometers, is that right, from the winery?
Yeah, that's right, that's right. You know, Wink, I've always made that point to people who came to visit us here in Volnay, that it's a great luxury to be able to walk to all our vineyards in Volnay. We can literally walk to all our vineyards in a very short walk, 15 minutes. And in Arbois, it's almost the same. Grand Cru is just a little bit outside of walking distance, but otherwise, most of our holdings are really around the winery and very close. But 5 kilometers is the right order of magnitude to go to from the winery to Grand Cru, which is the furthest away.
I have to thank you for that. I have to say I'm so excited by this Chardonnay. To me, this is the most exciting Chardonnay I have tasted from your domain so far. I love, and especially the fact that it comes from that warm vintage, 2018, and you wouldn't know it. It has freshness, and although I don't have the bottles with me, I looked it up. Is this 12.5%? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's about that. I would need to double check, but I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So when did you, do you remember, Francois, when did you pick the Chardonnay in 2018, roughly?
At the beginning of the harvest. I can't remember exactly the harvest date, but we start with Chardonnay, especially Chardonnay from Barbie, which is south exposed, and Pulsar.
Okay.
We often we are pruning the Chardonnay, we are cutting the Chardonnay in the morning and the red the afternoon with Pulsar and earliest Pinot Noir.
And how does it work? I think when we met before recently, you were telling me that the vintage dates compared to Burgundy were not at all what you were expecting at the beginning, and that you were expecting them to be very separate so that you could pick Burgundy and get that done and then come to the Jura. And I believe it's not like that.
Well, you know, climate change is happening quicker than Mr. Trump thinks. It's very clear that when we first considered Jura, which is in 2007, 2008, there was a difference. We thought we could finish Volnay, take a day off, and then start Montigny, Arbois. It very quickly turned out to be really next to one another and then overlap. And you know, this year in 2020, we will be starting Volnay around the 25th of August, and probably starting in Arbois on the 28th or 29th. So, but the big difference is, of course, that in Volnay, everything is ripe at the same time. Chardonnay and Pinot are close to one another, and all the Pinot, of course, is ripe at the same time because they are very close together. In Jura, it's very different because there's 5 different grapes, and those grapes have different vegetative cycles, so they're not ripe at the same time. They don't flower at the same time. And it took us a little while to understand that this was very smart in Jura to have different grape varieties with different cycles, because it's a kind of a hedge. You know, it's when one is hit by frost, the others are not, and vice versa. And sometimes when Savagnin, for example, is the latest, is the one that flowers and matures last. And in 2016, which I think we're going to be tasting later, in 2016, Francois decided to stop the harvest entirely for a full week after we had picked everything but the Savagnin, and we gave Savagnin another week to mature, and then we harvested Savagnin. And that, I think, is a huge difference from Volnay, because in Volnay, when we start, we don't stop. You know, we finish the harvest, we pick everything, and that's it. Whereas in Jura, we have this luxury, I don't know if we can call it a luxury, but we have this thing that we have to live with, which is the different cycles in the different varieties of grapes.
Well, we'll talk about Savagnin a little bit more in a little while, because it is an extraordinary grape, and I know that I think, Francois, you've fallen in love with Savagnin. But
yes.
let's stick to Chardonnay for these couple of Chardonnays we have here. So, I mean, this 18 Chardonnay blend of different varieties. I think the oak that you use is older than the oak that you would use in Burgundy. Is that right, Francois?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the quantity of new wood is ridiculous. Some years it's when the quantity is too tiny, no new wood, and in bigger quantity as in 2018, it's 2 or 3% of new wood, not more.
Okay, so I mean, I find this Chardonnay really Jurassien. It again has that spicy earthiness to it, some apple character to it, a lovely length, and certainly is going to age well. The next Chardonnay is the Ambarby, which you made, I believe, in 16, bottled it in magnums. Then 17 was a very small vintage because of frost, I think. Yes. As everywhere, everybody suffered in 17. So what made you bottle 18 on its own?
I will begin, and I will give Francois the finishing word. But you know, Ambarby, from the first day when we started visiting to acquire Chateau de Chavannes, we could see that this was a very special place. The Ambarby vineyard sits at the end of a series of hills. It's on a hill that is surrounded by other hills that act as a furnace. And what surprised us greatly when we first did our first vintage in 12 was that the natural alcohol levels were comparable to our Merceau Centenot. So, you know, that to find in Jura the same concentration, alcoholic concentration as in Burgundy, as in Merceau, was a huge surprise. And in fact, it's due to that particular exposure, which is a shield and also concentrates the heat so that full maturation is achievable. So from the first vintage on, we vinified separately Ambarby from the other Chardonnays to see what it looked like, to taste it all the way through until bottling, and only at bottling time did we actually put together the cuvée to see to produce our Chardonnay. And so year after year, Francois was pushing me in the direction of doing a single vineyard Ambarby, and he finally won, and he was right. He was right.
Okay. So. Well, Francois, can I ask you a specific question about Ambarby? In the very warm vintages that we've been having, you know, this is south facing, it's very warm, it's well drained, I believe, so therefore it must be at risk of drought and not having enough water. What are you doing in biodynamics to help the vine to withstand this?
We need, in fact, less water as in Burgundy because the soils are retaining more the water with the malts. And with Biodynamics, we can add some fresh preparation. I never done that in Jura, but sometimes in Volnay, you can spray some mix of 5-OOP with ortie.
Yeah, nettles. Yeah.
Nettles, okay. During a hot period. But the best thing is not to fight against the problem when the problem is there. The thing in biodynamics is to give immunity before. For example, from the beginning in autumn and in the spring, we pass some this preparation of manure that have passed in horn to have a very intense biological activity in the soil. In the spring, we are passing with 2 or 3 times with silica just before flowering, and it gives the information to the plant to have its own immunity. And with tests that we have done here in 15 in Volnay, the summer was very hot, and with 3 times you pass silica in the spring, and 2 times where during the flowering, we have a better crop. We have less leaves who were yellow during the harvest, and the grapes were keeping more freshness. It's like the education of the children. If you give the good information when they are young, after quite nothing to do. if you are coming when they are 18-year-old, it's too late.
Okay. So this 18 on Barbie it's a big wine. I think it needs to be forgotten about for a while and just left in the cellar. Would you?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
And you spoke about new varieties of grapes. We can say that Chardonnay en Barbie it's a new variety for us because we discover what happens with Chardonnay on those type of marls. It's really impressive because on the soil you don't see rocks. You have the impression that it's a field for cows, not for planting a vineyard. But when you taste the wines, you have a sensation of minerality, which is impressive. And you have a very good length and good volume of wine. And you have a signature on the nose, which is that you find only on those type of soils.
Okay. It's a wonderful wine for the future, I think. I could see, interestingly, because my wines were too cold when I tasted them just before that we started, but that's now an hour ago, more than an hour ago. And just the fact of it warming up in the glass is really giving a much greater complexity and expression to it. There is freshness there, but boy, it's such a big wine compared to the blended Chardonnay. I'm a cheapskate. I prefer the cheaper wine and the I'm a cheap date. So that's me. Let's talk about Savagnin because we have 3 Savagnins and we don't have too much time. I know that Frédéric Drouin is waiting in the wings to do another session later, so we haven't got all afternoon and evening. So Savagnin Houillet, topped up Savagnin, sometimes very wrongly called Savagnin floral in the region. It never gives any flower characteristics at all, but it is to differentiate it from the traditional Savagnins that are used to make vin jaune. So let's get that out of the way first of all. When's the first vin jaune going to be?
2023, Wink. We made a first attempt in 2015 and we failed miserably. So we tried again in 2016 with the help of Jacques Puffnet's guidance, and we are very hopeful that we will go all the way to vin jaune in that particular vintage, 2016, and then we've done it again in 17, 18, and 19. So we're on now. The cycle is started, the pump is started, and we will be producing vin jaune every vintage. And perhaps we will do, if we feel like it, perhaps we will produce an intermediate Savagnin, oxidative Savagnin from vintage 16. We will see, just as a test.
Okay, well, I look forward to trying that one day. Meantime, we have the Savagnin Houillets. We have 2 vintages here, wines 4 and 5. The younger one, 2018. So these were made from different parcels and all sorts of different soils, but including the famous Grey Marl. So how was your early experiences with working with Savagnin, Francois? What was your feeling working with it?
The earliest experience was 2012. I was very surprising because the first Savagnin you have in your hand, you say, okay, you put in the press, and I press like Chardonnay. So at the end of the press, I saw that there was not a lot of juice. And when I opened the press, wow, there was lots of berries who have too many choices. So we have learned, and now the time for pressing the Savagnin is more longer. It's around 1 hour more longer as the Chardonnay. We don't want to crush hardly. We prefer take time and have a light extraction of the juice.
But also what I find, oh, go on.
I was just going to say that the reason for this is the skins of Savagnin are much harder than the skins of Chardonnay. So that explains why it takes longer to press.
Yeah, well, in fact, skins as well, the next question, because I actually don't know many vignerons who macerate in the Jura, who macerate overnight their Savagnin. Maybe it's something that I haven't asked enough questions, but have you been doing this right from the start, or is this something that you've done recently?
No, we have learned. We have made some tests. First test, I don't remember if it was 13 or 14. We made test of direct pressing and maceration, and with or without stems. And the best way that we have found, and we start with 16 with that, is to let 1/3 of all the press without the stem and with the maceration one night. And after one night of maceration, the skin are more wet and less harder. And we put them back in the press in the morning. And the idea was to have a small maceration to extract a little bit, a very light part of the aromatic component of the skin.
Yeah, well, it's something that, I mean, I'm also in love with this grape and have been for many years, and I love the Huillet style and it's so exciting because every producer has their own expression of it really across the Jura, and there are just, you can't, when people ask me what is a Savagnin Huillet like, it's very hard to answer because even among a dozen good producers, each one makes it quite differently, many more differences than there would be with Chardonnay. And I think that sums up the actual grape, that you can do so many things with it. And I had the chance with you in the cellar to try your 2019, which was still on the skins, I think.
Yes.
Or you had, yeah, which is another project you have to make a sort of, it's not quite orange, but a skin maceration wine.
10 days, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's an exciting one for others to look out for. We don't have one today, but was 18 the first vintage for that?
It was 18, yes. Okay. In fact, we were very happy with 18 because we have enough grapes to start to really play with all the terroirs we want. It was from 15 with Guillaume that we had the idea of making diversification to explore more precisely the different terroirs. But 16, 17 were bad, not bad years in terms of quality, but in terms of yields. So we had to wait. And when 18 arrives, we say yes.
Yeah. So yeah, 18, if for those not familiar, there was lots of quantity in 18, but quality too.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's the beauty about Savagnin. It's that it's a very versatile grape variety. You can do so many different things with Savagnin, and it forgives you for testing new things. And the maceration idea is great. The vin jaune is great. The Savagnin, oxidative Savagnin after 3 years is great. There's so many different iterations possible. Of course, Savagnin Huillet, like you say, and many ways of doing it. So it's a most versatile grape. It's a wonderful grape.
Yeah, and it truly is. Yeah, I'm definitely pleased to see that you do different things with it. So, I mean, this 18 is another wine that I just want to say, leave it on the side. It's got a lot of, it has some of that greeny, lemony character, but and it's very dry, very stony, very dry, mineral too. But to me, it hasn't quite married together yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, are you? enjoying it. But when you try the 16, which I have next to it, it is a completely different animal. It's just expressing itself so much more. And it has, it's developed elegance, and it has a real, the 16 to me shows the stony mineral character that is so, so Jura, so Arbois in every single grape variety there is.
16 is the opposite vintage as 18. It's one of our latest vintage. Flowering of the Savagnin in 16 was beginning of July.
Yeah.
So we start the harvest of Savagnin 4 or 5 October.
Okay. So that's
with the frost. It was minus than 1 or 2 when the team were pruning the Savagnin. It was not very good condition, but a perfect sunshine.
Okay, so if that was picked on around the 5th of October, the 2018 was picked, what, the second week of September? Or?
Yes, more around the 10th.
Almost a month earlier. Let's say 3 weeks earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, 16 is the one I was telling you about earlier, where Francois took the decision to send all the pickers home for a week after we had picked everything but the Savagnin. And that was a wonderful decision. I personally view Savagnin Houillet 16 as a major, major step up from the previous vintages. You know, our learning curve was still quite steep at that time, but the difference in completeness in the way that this wine appears today compared to the previous vintages is a major step up, I find.
It's gorgeous. I'm really loving the 16. We are getting a bit short of time, so just before we try the last wine, can you tell us a little bit more about the terroir and the replanting, especially for the Savagnin of Grand Cru?
Okay, Savagnin of Grand Cru have been replanted in 15 and 16, and with varieties of massal varieties who are coming from the 2/3 from Pigné and 1/3 from Domaine de la Pinte. We were
Sorry, who was the 1/3 from?
Domaine de la Pinte. Domaine de la Pinte.
You know them.
La Pinte. La Pinte. So some from Arbois and some from down near Lens-le-Saunier.
Yes.
Okay. Both run in Biodynamics.
But you have to remember that the Grand Cru before Brignot was run by Robert Avier. Yeah. And Robert Avier was the pépiniériste of Arbois from just after the Second War. And Antoine Pigné said that his father took some grapes from Robert Avier, so from the Grand Cru, to plant his vineyard. So 50 years after, we are coming back to Montaigu to bring back the original plants were coming from the Grand Cru.
So it's full cycle. So yes. For those of you who didn't quite understand that, the pépiniériste is a vine nurseryman. So the original Arbois owner of Cru had a nursery as well, which many people did in the old days. And Pigné got some of his Savagnin from there. So therefore now you've got that back and planted that. That's brilliant. I love that story. Yeah. Very nice. Yeah. Shall we taste?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, we can go
so
on.
We can see on the picture, we were helped by a geologist who follow us from now more than 20 years in Volnay, and who is coming from the top hill from Jura.
Okay, so this is Héraudy, is that's his
name? It's Héraudy, yes.
Yeah, Monsieur, I haven't met him. I know a couple of other geologists, but not him.
You have a picture of him somewhere on in your presentation, I think.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes. That's right. I was mistaking his beard for a rock.
Yeah. So your first small vintage was 18 from this vineyard.
Yeah, the single vineyard vintage was 18. Yes.
Yeah.
First
So that's what we've got here. The very first crop of 3-year-old vines.
That's right. Yeah.
Which was a fabulous vintage to start with, and then presumably 19 was more difficult, was it?
No.
Not particularly more difficult.
Quite less. In fact, we start in Jura with 2012, 13 and 14 who were just awful in terms of climate. So all the year after were quite easy.
Okay, so 19 was the drought more than anything, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, but good apart from that. So this Grand Cru Relais Savagnin, which you've made separately,
Yes.
has just the most gorgeous nose. It really, really does. It has that fabulous sort of lemon meringue character to me, and really almost exotic. I've just had a funny thought, but this is really heretic. So I'm sure that all the audience will laugh at this, and you will be mad at me. But it reminds me of a really zingy pisco sour from Chile or Peru, where you have this squeeze of bright lemon. And I think that I'm thinking of that because we've got, you know, quite an alcoholic vintage as well. And I'm not saying it tastes like it, I promise you. It's just reminded me of it from that lemony character.
Yeah, like you pointed out that these were quite young vines. You know, they are 3-year-old vines, of course. The wine, this single vineyard wine, will progress a great deal over the next few years. I'm very certain of that as the vines settle in. But the terroir of Grand Cru Relais, north facing, the slope, the multicolored mass, everything calls for Savagnin. And that's why we took the view that we needed to replant in that same particular grape.
Yeah.
So that's why we have a heavy exposure to Savagnin, but we love it.
It is so long on the mouth. It's so intense, and more than for me I was a little critical of the Ambarby Chardonnay because it was sort of just too big. But the Savagnin seems to be able to take that richness. The grape can cope with that. The acidity is really vibrant. The terroir character comes out. It's just, it's stunning. Well done. Well, look, thank you. I'm going to see whether we have some questions to address, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop sharing this, and there's lots of chat, but I'm going to see whether we have one question there. This is a great question. A great question from Mark Carrington, who asks, he read somewhere that you have no intention of producing a pure unblended Pinot Noir. Is that still the case?
No, it's not. It's not. That was our original intention. So he may well have read this. But again, Francois, who is my yang or my yin, but one of the two, convinced me that we should be producing a Pinot Noir cuvée. And we started in vintage 18, actually. There's one out already in vintage 18. It's a very special cuvée, which comes mostly from Clos Saint-Laurent, around the winery. And we're delighted with it, frankly. It was a bit of a hurdle for us because it's very hard not to have this benchmark of Volnay in your mind when you produce a Pinot Noir somewhere else. But it turns out a great Pinot, very vibrant, very tense, a lot of tension in the wine, helped by the altitude. So we're very satisfied with it. I think we're going to continue producing that particular cuvée.
I forgot I had seen that on the list, but yeah, that's exciting. So how many is it in the range total now?
It's, I think, 10, yeah. We 10? Have four reds and 6 whites. Yeah.
Okay. And Guillaume, I know that you've been traveling the world promoting these wines, which of course promotes the Jura as well, because many Jura producers are frankly too busy and too much in their vineyards that they just don't have the time to travel, so they leave it to their importers to wave the banner. How have you been finding promoting Pélican specifically around the world?
Yeah. You know, you were right to say that my position is the same in Volnay too. I always promote the appellation before I promote my own wines, and in Jura it's particularly true. And our friends, our new friends from Jura, from Arbois, understand that, and I think they like that. When I travel around the world, I promote Arbois, Jura, Arbois, and then Pélican. And the response is great because what I tell them, which by the way is true, there is a very long tradition of winemaking in Jura, but it's never hit outside of the region almost, you know. You know well that probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the wines that are produced are drunk locally, you know, so very little wines from Jura actually hit France, let alone export markets. And so when I come out and I say to them, the great wine region, wonderful terroirs, you know, great people there, diverse landscape, and we came in and we learned and we liked the region, and therefore we started making those wines, and we keep our own vinification methods, but we learn about Jura. People are attracted, they're interested. It's a tiny region, but it has a long history and tradition of winemaking and great terroirs. So they're prepared to listen. They are prepared to listen.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really nice thing. I've got another question from Miriam, who asks whether you have any plans to produce a Crémant.
Okay, so we were gonna hide something from you, but we're gonna show it to you. This is a world first time that anybody sees this.
It's got a big S on it.
Yeah. So we are going to be making, and please embargo this for as long as you can, because we are going to be producing bubbles, but made 100% with Sauvignon. Okay. So it will not be called Crémant because we're not allowed to call it Crémant because it's 100% Sauvignon. So it will be a vin de France, but it will be Crémant de Jura made by us with Sauvignon grapes, and I think it's going to be a huge success.
I can't wait to taste it. I think it will be. It's from the 18. It's from a base of 18. Yes. Yeah. It's a very. I have had the chance to taste a few pure Sauvignon traditional method sparkling, which can't be Crémant. And yeah, it's a wonderful grape for that, and I think that'll be brilliant. The final question, and then we'll have to sort of stop. Is from Ian, who he actually asks, how would the locals manage if you were suddenly exporting a lot more? But in fact, I'm going to partly answer that and say that you actually don't sell very much in the region, I think. Is that, what is your sort of figures?
We sell about 80% on the export markets.
80?
80, yeah, 80. And locally, very little, only the few very well-known local restaurants, and that's really it. We sell quite a bit in the Paris region. It's quite a significant market, but most of the wines go to export markets. United States, Asia, very, very active with Pelican. Scandinavia, very active as well. United Kingdom, of course, goes without saying. A very diverse audience. Yeah.
Well, it has to be said that in Jura, it is known as an area for locals and visitors alike as somewhere that's very, very good value. And perhaps your wines are at the very top end of the price scale for Jura. You're not the only ones at that price, no, but you are one of a handful at the top end. And then there is this sort of chauvinism that, hey, you're not from Jura. Terrible. So, but I know that you've got lots of very, very keen markets in Paris, in the other good cities, and across the world. So, thank you very much for giving us your time today, and good luck with the rest of the 19 vintage. And hopefully, everybody's learned a bit today from Biodynamics. I sort of finish off with another slide, except that, oh, there we go, just to say that I wrote a book on it, although of course it's very out of date when it comes to Domaine du Pélican. And I wrote down a couple of distributors, Justerini and Brooks are the distributors in the UK, and is it Grand Cru Selection among others, perhaps?
Yeah, no, that's them, yeah.
And
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much, Wink. Thank you, 67 Pall Mall. It's very nice to have been with you for an hour and talk about Pelican. We love Pelican, we love Jura. And Wink, you've been such a great support for this region. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Wink.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland.
See you soon over there.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.